Hi, I'm Laura Murray. Some of you probably know me as the Chief Development Officer of the museum, but over this weekend, I've become the president of the museum. So on behalf of the National Museum of Language, I'm very happy to welcome you to our event. And for those of you who are new to the National Museum of Language, we are a fully virtual museum. We don't have a building. We did at one time, but almost around 10 years ago, we had to give up the building because of cost issues. And so we were early adopters of being an online organization. Um, Unlike most other language museums around the world, we don't specialize in a single language. We look at language very holistically. Uh, we have three major themes that we try to cover. One is language acquisition, which would be language teaching and learning. Language utilization, which is how language is used in society. And for example, this could include people who work in translation or interpretation. And also language preservation is our third main thing. We're looking at languages which are dying out because of lack of speakers primarily, and efforts to preserve these languages. And you may wonder how we do this since we don't have a building. We have online programs such as this one. We have a website where we host exhibits. If you go to our website, you can see many of our exhibits. Some recent ones that have been interesting to a lot of people. We had a virtual cruise to Puerto Rico, bilingual Spanish-English presentation. We have something called Sharing Our Stories, which is a presentation of children's stories from around the world in their original languages and with English translations. And we have our Power of Poetry exhibit, Resisting Injustice with Language, which we're studying social justice themes in poetry from ancient times to the present day. And we mean ancient, we mean really ancient, the ancient Middle East, 1000, 2000 BC. People were already talking about issues like economic inequality and things like that. So all of these are international with many different places represented and many different languages. We welcome anyone who's interested in participating in the museum. We have a lot of opportunities to be a volunteer or as a member. We'll be talking about that later. But if this interests you, please get in touch with us. And we also focus on linguistic and cultural diversity as an issue. And we have a sort of a somewhat whimsical aspect of our mission statement, is that we celebrate what we call the magic and beauty of human communication. So these are things that we try to highlight in our exhibits and programs. And I'm very happy to see a good turnout today. And again, once again, welcome you to the National Museum of Language.
So while we're listening to our speaker today, if any questions come up, you can type them in the chat and we will monitor them, and we will make sure that they are addressed before our break. We're going to have about a 5-minute stretch break in about an hour, and either before or after the break, we'll be addressing questions. And then at the end of the presentation, there'll be time for questions and answers. So I feel kind of silly introducing our guest today, because I think most of you know as much, if not more, about him than I do. But in my college days, I read about him in almost every course that I took. He is now an emeritus professor of education at the University of Southern California. He's the author of over 500 books and articles in the field of bilingual education, neurolinguistics, second language acquisition, and literacy. And I found out in talking to him this week that he's got a great sense of humor and he's fascinated with languages, just like the rest of us language geeks. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Stephen Krashen. So take it away, Stephen.
Okay, Well, thank you. Beautiful introduction. And I want to say one more thing. Thanks for mentioning the books online. If you go to sdkrashen.com, you can get lots of my books and articles, and I'm adding to them all the time. Free download. Free. It's the only way you can get people to read this stuff because the books are so expensive. I can't afford them, and I don't know anyone who can. I can only afford to subscribe to like 2 journals, and I read regularly from about 50 of them. So the only solution is open access and putting things online. So go to sdkrashen.com. And fortunately, I'm not the only one who's doing this. It really
And
must
that
be
link,
done, or
mhm.
it's the end of our
That link is in the
profession, I
chat.
think. Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, let me start out by telling you how this all began in recent times. I live about 20 minutes from the local supermarket, and I started going there early in the morning because they had a special time for old people, for people 65 and older, and I easily qualify for that, so I went. The first time I went there, I got my groceries to check out, and the man checking out my groceries, ringing them up on the cash register, I saw his name, said Fidel. So I figured he must speak Spanish. He's probably Mexican American. So I spoke Spanish to him. My Spanish isn't very good, I got to tell you. It's better now. I'll tell you why. But it's like language 3 or 4 on the list. He answered me in English, and he explained apologetically that he has to do that. That is company policy. Well, I ignored that and I continued on in Spanish. I said, Fidel, tú puedes ayudarme, you can help me. Mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. I want to learn to speak Spanish just the way you do. He liked that. Nice guy. So we started speaking Spanish. I said, hablamos español. Sure enough, I've been speaking Spanish to Fidel for the last 2 years, about once a week when I go there early in the morning. And I can tell I've gotten better. He now speaks more quickly. He uses more idiomatic language. And right now, those of you who know Spanish, it's not just hablar, it's charlar. We do a lot of gossiping. Who was it who said, if you don't have anything good to say about somebody, come sit next to me, right? That was actually President Roosevelt's daughter. So we've been expanding our topics, but I can't really talk to him a lot. It's like 2 minutes every 2 weeks if I'm lucky, because he's got other customers. But nevertheless, I'm getting better. And I want to tell you my evidence. Fidel is talking more quickly to me, using more idiomatic language, especially if we're talking about other people. Okay. And I have a few friends, not very many, that I occasionally speak Spanish to. And a couple of them have said, Steve, your Spanish has gotten so much better. What are you doing? What is your secret? Well, I'll tell you what I'm not doing. I'm not looking up vocabulary words. I'm not making flashcards. Fidel doesn't correct me ever, okay? I'm doing something very different. When I go home, I read graded readers. Graded readers are easy books designed for language students. And let me give you the good news. Graded readers have gotten much better over the years. In fact, I would say a lot of them have become literature. I've been reading them in Spanish. I've been reading Bill Van Patten's readers. Some of you know who he is. He's done really good work in language acquisition theory. Really good work means he agrees with me, so I think he's wonderful. Also, I've been reading the work of Adriana Ramirez. She's my favorite author now. Adriana's an amazing writer. She is responsible for all this becoming literature, and she and Bill especially. I'll give you an example. One of her books is about a young man from Canada who goes to Bogota, which is where Adriana's from. And he's going to meet some friends. His Spanish is terrible. He's had like one semester, he can hardly say anything. And he's trying to find a hotel where he's supposed to meet his friends. And he gets lost. He meets a young man and says, in his halting Spanish, he said, can you help me find the hotel, whatever? And the young man, he got the right guy. He says, I know where it is. Come walk with me. I'll take you there. So they start walking. They run into 3 beautiful young ladies. See how she makes this interesting all of a sudden? The young ladies come rushing up to his new friend, give him hugs, give him kisses on the cheek, hold his hand, and then he introduces the young ladies to the narrator of the story. They give him hugs and hold his hand. Finally, they arrive at the hotel, which is not very far. And his new friend says to the narrator, kind of, I suppose you're wondering what's going on here. These girls, there's nothing happening. There's no romance. This is the way we are in Colombia. These girls happen to be my cousins, and we're all very, very demonstrative and physical with other people we like our age. There's nothing special happening here. So what she manages to do throughout the entire book is introduce you to the culture with these kind of ambiguous scenes. You're not quite sure what's happening. And then she explains it, usually in the voice of, in the words of one of the characters in the story. This is an example. This is how these things are getting better. So I'm not studying Spanish on the side. I'm not getting corrected. I'm reading lots and lots of easy books that are so interesting, you kind of forget they're in Spanish. You get absorbed in the story, which I think is crucial. Well, I'm going to give you some more examples, and then we'll get into some hardcore theory. I want to give you 2 language lessons in a language you've probably heard before. Maybe a couple of you speak. And you can tell me which of the 2 lessons is better. Then we'll talk heavy theory. Here's language lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? If I kept talking to you like that, you think you'd pick up German? No, probably not. It was too fast. How about if I slowed down? Would that help? Maybe. Not always, but maybe. Here's lesson number 2. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf? Ja, Kopf. Und hier sind meine Ohren. Meine Ohren. Ich habe 2 Ohren. 1, 2. Und hier sind meine Augen. Meine Augen. Ich habe 2 Augen. 1, 2. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Meine Zigaretten. Ach, ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, the slow version, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. I'm now going to share with you the most, I think, important hypothesis that we have in our field, which has really changed everything. I am not the sole inventor of this hypothesis. Other people had very similar ideas. I just think it is absolutely correct. We acquire language in one way, no individual variation. We all do it the same. We acquire language in one way, and here it is. When we understand it. Not necessarily every word, but when you understand at least some of it, you acquire some language. We call this comprehensible input. Language acquisition happens when we get comprehensible input. Let me give you a little bit of idea of what goes on in this comprehensible input idea. We acquire language, and notice I use the word acquire. Let me back up and give you this distinction, very important. There are 2 ways of getting better in another language. You can acquire language, which is what I hope you just did, and you can learn language. Acquisition happens subconsciously. While it's happening, you don't know it's happening. Once you're finished happening, you're not always aware that anything has happened in your brain. But it does take place, and it's quite real. We are very, very good at language acquisition. Human beings are designed to acquire language. We're very good at it. The other process is called language learning. We're not very good at language learning. Language learning means knowing about language consciously, knowing the rules, being able to talk about them. The third person singular has an S at the end. That's a consciously learned rule. All of language teaching until 10 years ago was based entirely on conscious learning. We were just making it difficult for ourselves Conscious learning has of extremely limited function. We can use it only to help us correct our errors, and not very many of them, just a few of them. It's not very efficient, not very strong. So of the two processes, language acquisition is the powerful one, language learning, much less powerful, but this is what we have been working on or assuming to be true. Next slide, please. I'll do a better job of hanging in there with the slide. Okay, so we acquire language only when we understand messages. It's the only way it happens. The best input, we think, has these characteristics. Number one, of course, it's comprehensible. Number two, it's interesting. I like the word compelling. The input is so interesting, you forget that it's in a second language. You get absorbed in the story. Number three, there's a lot of it. It's abundant. And we pick up language gradually, a little at a time. Researchers from the University of Illinois do really wonderful work. They did this work in first language. I know it applies to second as well. We've done studies as well. When you hear a new word in a comprehensible context, you don't get the whole thing right away. You don't get it, you don't remember it, etc. Each time you hear the word in a comprehensible context, you pick up a little more of the meaning, or you know a little more about the grammatical rule. So it happens gradually, not all at once. Let's go to the next slide. I hope I remember what's on it. Oh yes, amazing. Oh, this is a great one, it's my favorite. Amazing facts about language acquisition. I'm still very impressed with this stuff, let me tell you. If you understood the second German lesson, you picked up a little German and you didn't have to work hard. No hard work, no effort, no heroic trying hard, etc. It happens without your trying. If you get comprehensible input, it happens. The next one I think is even more mystical. Language acquisition is involuntary. If you understood some of the second lesson, you acquired some German, whether you liked it or not. The language acquisition device works automatically. You can't shut it off. Chomsky says the language acquisition device is a mental organ. It's part of what we're born with. For example, if you can see things, if your eyes are open and your vision is okay, you see things, you can't decide to not see. You'd have to close your eyes to do that. Or if you hear someone say something, hear a noise, you can't decide not to hear. The hearing system is always on and it's always working unless there's something wrong. Okay, next slide, please. Getting better at remembering. Oh, yes. Now, let's talk about application. I think I found the key to application one day driving on Pacific Coast Highway outside of Los Angeles. I used to drive a full hour up and back, sometimes as often as twice a week, because I had business in both Santa Monica and Venice. In Santa Monica, I'll tell you about Venice first. In Venice, I had to go down to Venice Beach to pump iron. The weightlifting area is in Venice Beach. So I went down there, met a group of guys, and we used to lift weights. And guess who would come by? Arnold. Arnold would drop by and say hello and lift with us a little bit. And he'd stop and help you. My God, so nice. He'd tell me, say, can I help you with that? Try it this way, you know? Arnold had like a PhD in weightlifting. He knew so much. And he was a kid in his middle 20s, Mr. Universe twice by then, etc. So I used to go down to Venice Beach for that. And another thing I used to do was stop at the Santa Monica Library, because that ride into the city and back, 30 minutes each way, gets kind of boring. What do you do when you're in the car and you have nothing to do? You turn on the radio. Well, what do you listen to? First, I listened to the news. And even then, it was Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. So I had had enough. So I decided I would start listening to music. My undergraduate work was in music history, piano, all that stuff. And being a music person, I like classics. I want to listen to Brahms. I want to listen to Beethoven. I want to listen to the Bee Gees. I want to listen to the Beatles, the great music. Do you know what they did? They took all the good music and they put it on special stations that you had to pay in order to listen to. So I stopped listening to music. So what do I do now? I stopped at the Santa Monica Library, and I like doing that for several reasons. First of all, my daughter works there, and I got to say hi to her, and that was nice. And I decided to get some audiobooks and listen to them in the car. Good, audiobooks. I know what I'll do. I'll get audiobooks in all the languages I'm interested in. And of course, I'll get classics because I'm a former college professor. They didn't have either. All they had was bestsellers in English. So I went for bestsellers in English. I got them on discs, on tape, and I started listening. The first one I listened to was the first Harry Potter volume. And you know, Harry Potter was written for us. It's all about education. It's all about what's happening at Hogwarts, what went on in all the classes. In fact, one of the 7 novels, the main character was Dumbledore, who is the principal of the school, the headmaster. So absolutely fascinating for people like us, especially. Very good education, discussion of education, teaching methods, etc. My favorite character in those books, not Harry Potter, but Hermione. Hermione was Harry's friend. They took classes together. Hermione was the good student who was always raising her hand. I know the answer. I know the answer. I lectured on this in one of my classes, and one of my students wrote a brilliant essay called, "Is Hermione Smart?" Is that what we want for our students, to these fantastic, well-behaved students who get everything right, do all the homework, etc.? Very, very interesting discussion. These books were interesting. They were so interesting that I started doing what you do. When I stop at a service station or pull the car up at home, I'd often stay in the car and hear, so I could hear the end of the chapter. They were that good. I have listened to all 7 of the Harry Potter novels. I think they're excellent, all of them. And I've listened to other genres I wouldn't normally listen to. I started listening to medical novels, John Grisham, detective stories, historical fiction, all this stuff. And my conclusion was popular literature is not bad at all. In fact, sometimes it's really good. So I gained a true respect for so-called popular novels, bestsellers, etc. They're not all terrific, but they're pretty good. Let's go to the next slide, please. What am I supposed to be talking about? Oh, yes. How do we apply this? My colleague, Beniko Mason, teaches a professor there and has taught English as a foreign language in Japan, has divided her method, all based on this stuff, to 3 levels. Level number 1 is listening, story listening to stories that have been shown to be of universal interest. In her words, they have stood the test of time. She prepares for the classes. She takes stories out that she knows these kids will enjoy at their age, okay? She studies them in advance and rehearses how to explain the hard words, paragraphs, what things to change, uses lots of drawing, occasional translation if she needs to, gestures. They're not quizzed on the story when they finish. They don't have to write a translation. They don't do extra vocabulary exercises, etc. They made wonderful gains on both vocabulary and grammar, on everything she tested them on, okay? They didn't have to restate the story, etc. They just go on to the next story. Now, let me say this again, what Introduction to English is. English 1. English 1 is story time. Isn't that beautiful? You come to school, relax, and listen to some interesting stories that have been selected for you, known to be of interest and known to be comprehensible. What Dr. Mason did once, we did it with her, she included activities to reinforce the vocabulary. Let's make sure they know the vocabulary. Extra exercises, draw a line from the word to the definition. She found that it was more efficient simply to tell another story. They made more gains in vocabulary from hearing lots of stories than combining stories with standard instruction. Okay, the next slide. The next area. Okay, stage 2, guided self-selected reading. This is where they start reading the graded readers, and that's where I got the idea from in reading in Spanish, this stuff. Guided because kids get some help in selecting them. The first day of class, when they finish their story listening for a semester or two, and they're ready to start books, she brings the students into class, and on the table, spread out, are graded readers, lots of them. And the students are encouraged to mill around the table and have a look at them, see which ones seem interesting, see which ones they'd like to read. They can get help from the teacher. Teacher might advise, oh, do you think this might be good? Do you have any on this topic, etc.? They get to select what they like. They don't have to finish every book that they start. They don't have to finish any books. They go on to the next story. There's no quiz. There's no retelling it in your first language, in your second language. More reading. Next slide, please. I have to remember what's on these slides. Okay, stage 3, you're reading the real stuff. Okay, let's go to number 4. And or the next slide. This is, they're reading authentic things written by native speakers for native speakers. And again, it's up to us what they select. What has come of this? What are the results? We've done lots and lots of testing. The students were very eager, some of them, to see how they would do on the TOEIC tests. The TOEIC test is for sure the most best known, most widely used test of English as a second language in the world. She got copies of them, the the listening and the reading part, and various students took it, and the results were spectacular. The TOEIC goes from 0 to 1,000. When you get to 250, you're about ready to start reading easy texts. When you get to 600, 700, 800, you've pretty much arrived. You can handle academic English, etc. You can understand a great deal. Here's the results, which I think is really spectacular. For each hour of reading they did, they gained 0.6 of a point on the TOEIC. Now, if you do the math, what you find out is they go from 250 all the way up to 600, 700. They're getting close to academic English. Really, if you do a couple of years in relaxed, self-selected reading of books you like that are comprehensible, you get very, very good in English. They've done better on all kinds of tests. Let's go to the next slide. Try to remember what was on it. Next slide, please. You reach the international proficiency level that in the test level, you're certified as good, etc. I want to tell you a couple of other studies about this, which I've listed here. One of them, the Lin Shen and Krashen study. Fei Shen was my student. She was the one that got going on this really, I think, convincing study. The student was a formerly limited English proficient student in secondary school who had been reclassified. So her English was pretty much okay. She went to a school where in the beginning of the year, they gave all students a test of English at the start. In the spring, they gave them another test to see how much they've gotten better, okay? Well, this student, her name was Sophie, we called it Sophie's Choice, actually got worse during the year. Her scores went down. Oh my. She then went home during the summer break. Now in Los Angeles area where we are, it gets pretty hot in the summer. So she took refuge from the heat by going to the local public library and sitting in a cool area and sitting in the children's literature section, the section dedicated to beginning teenage reading. She read Nancy Drew. She read Sweet Valley High, the kinds of books that teenagers read and actually like. She improved enormously. When she went back, her score went from below where it should be to above where it should be. This absolutely worked. Now, I have in one of my books, which you can get for free, you guys, The Power of Reading is right there in sdkrashen.com and more to come. By the way, if you want to share it with your friends, that's fine with me. You can give it away yourself. Study after study shows this. Kids who read for pleasure grow in vocabulary, grow in grammar, grow in every kind of test related to language. So reading for pleasure gives you language, and there is tons of research, and I'll let you read The Power of Reading so you can find out. Let's go on to the next slide, and it'll be even more spectacular. So not only do students get more language when they read for fun, they get more knowledge. They know more about nearly everything. This study should have changed the world. Astanovich and Cunningham. Oh, when I read it, I sent a note to my colleague, Jeff McQuill, and he said, oh my God, yes, this is amazing. Anyway, here's the study. They took native speakers of English, college students, in their first 2 years of college and gave them tests on a variety of subjects. For example, math, gave them a math test, gave them a reading comprehension test, gave them a history test, all kinds of subjects, etc. A test of mechanical skills, etc. Then they gave them a questionnaire, asked them about their reading habits. They asked them things like, do you know who this author is? Do you know who this author? Naming well-known authors of the time. Those who did better, who were more familiar with current literature, knew more about everything. Okay. It wasn't the ones with better grades. Greater grades was not a good predictor. Those who studied hard did not know more. Those who knew more math did not do better in science. Those who were better in reading comprehension did not know more. Those who watched more TV did worse than anyone. Those who knew more about contemporary authors, those who read more magazines and newspapers, they knew more. This is quite spectacular. You want to know more, read more about just anything. Wow. Well, let's go on to the next one. You'll see some gets better and better. What about homework? This is the work of Alfie Kohn. This is another book that should have changed things, in my opinion, made life much better. He did what I consider to be a very thorough review of all the research on homework. His conclusions: widespread assumptions about the benefits of homework, higher achievement, better self-discipline, responsibility, are not substantiated by the available evidence. Alfie Kohn concluded, homework doesn't work. It only frustrates students and their parents. So we find that reading for pleasure is a lot better than homework. If you read what you want to read for pleasure, you'll learn a lot more, your language will get a lot better, etc. Let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. Okay. There's a third thing. I've said two things so far. Let's make it a third. Number one, if you read a lot of fiction for fun, your language gets better. Number two, if you read lots of fiction for fun, you know more. You know more subject matter. Number three, if you read a lot of fiction, you understand other people a lot better. You grow in understanding and empathy. Here's Noam Chomsky. It is quite possible, overwhelmingly probable, what we will always learn more about human life and personality from novels than from scientific psychology. Let's go to the next one. Great quote. This is Terry Gross. Here, as I did in school, what you're learning in part is empathy. You're learning to be somebody else, learning to see the world through their eyes. Wow. The time spent on homework, much better spent on reading for pleasure. Let's go to the next. I want to give you my experience on all these things, what happens with assigned reading, etc. My claim is that if you select the books yourself, it's much more effective than if they're assigned in school. And one part of this is what our experience is when someone gives us a book as a gift. I get books all the time as gifts. Say, oh, you might be interested in this, and they give me a copy. Oh, then I'll see them a couple of weeks later. Say, Steve, how'd you like that book I gave you? And of course, I haven't read it. I'm busy reading what I want to read, of course. Uh, I have one colleague who says he has a shelf of books that people have given him as gifts. And every time he passes by the shelf, the books are staring down at him, making him feel guilty. I know that feeling, etc. I have one exception when it comes to gift books. We each have one person in our lives. When this person recommends a book, I read it immediately because he knows me better than I know myself. He knows what I should be reading, and that's my son. And he's always been right. Okay. So I always take his advice. But in general, we don't go for this. Okay. My experience in high school and secondary school, I'm betting, is the same as yours. In high school and secondary school in the Midwest in the United States, I had language arts class. We did a year of English literature and a year of American literature. I did all the required reading. I passed tests. I wrote essays on the assigned books. Today, I don't remember a single book that I read that was assigned for class. Not one. I'll tell you what I do remember, and I'm betting this was true for you. I remember the books that I found myself. When I was in high school, I read science fiction mostly. Another genre, I'll tell you about that. I read Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, the big three. They're wonderful. And in other languages, I like reading science fiction. French do a good job in science fiction, let me tell you. Not every author, but some good ones. Anyway, I remember all the ones I read that I did that were science fiction. I read baseball stories during those years. I discovered a series by a guy named John R. Tunis. John R. Tunis wrote a mythical series, he made up fiction, of a mythical baseball team, called them the Brooklyn Dodgers. This supposedly took place in the 1940s, okay? And the stories were all about this baseball team. And they were good. I remember them to this day vividly. I'll tell you about a couple of them just to give you an idea how good some of this fiction can be. The Kid from Tompkinsville was the first one in John R. Tunis' series. And it's about a young high school student or beginning college student, 19 years old, who's a phenomenal pitcher in high school. Unbelievable. The Dodgers invite him to train and be on the team. 19 years old. He joins the team. He wins his first 17 games. No one can touch him. Then tragedy. He slips and falls in the shower, bumps his elbow. He can still throw the ball fine, but he can't do the fancy pitches you're supposed to do if you're a professional baseball player. So and he was a good player. He's a good runner, a good fielder, and a very good hitter. They kept him on the team. The next year, he started as an outfielder. 3 years later, he led the league in hitting. He was an all-around wonderful player. I read a review of this book in a literary journal, and the reviewer said, "The Kid from Tompkinsville is the boy's book of Job. It's about suffering and overcoming it and coming back." Another book by John R. Tunis. Let's go to the next one, just in case there's anything there. Another book that I read, oh good, get there, was another baseball story from the same author, John R. Tunis, called The Keystone Kids. I've published articles on all these things, by the way. It was really fun doing it. I think it was a good deed. In this book, a young player joins the Dodgers, becomes the shortstop, and he's such a good player and so mature that they name him manager of the team. Now, if you know baseball, players are not usually managers. The manager is usually 10, 15 years older. So this was a kid in his 20s who was appointed the player manager, and he had to give a speech and gain the respect of the older players. He gave a wonderful speech. I like it so much, I keep a copy of it. Here's an example. When you're at bat and you hit a ground ball, and you know, in the major leagues, if you hit a ground ball in the infield, someone picks it up, you're going to be out. They'll throw the ball to first base. It'll get there before you will. You'll be out. But the new manager says, when you do that, run to first base as fast as you can. The fielder might drop the ball. The throw might go wild. The batter will get to first base, maybe second base, and maybe score a run, and you might lose the game. In other words, what he was saying was, be impeccable. Be perfect in what you do in life, even the little things. Now, at that time, I was going to a medical center for my medical treatment. And the guy who treated me, doctor, was a guy named Dr. Pearl, Seymour Pearl. And Seymour and I started talking about baseball. Turned out he really was a baseball fanatic, okay? And I told him about these books. He started reading them, and he loved them. And we talked about the book about being impeccable. And he said, "This is true of medicine. The Keystone Kids. You get a patient, and excuse me, the patient appears to have a very ordinary disease, and you know the medication. It's going to work. You prescribe it, but don't stop there. If you're a good doctor, make sure he got the right medication. Make sure he knows about the possible side effects. Make sure he doesn't take too much of it or with the wrong foods." That's professionalism. That's impeccability. That influenced me unbelievably over the years. I think about that. So when I wash dishes, I make sure I dry the dishes. I make sure I put them away. I put the teaspoons in where they go and not with the forks, etc. Impeccability in all ways. I have learned from that novel is quite important. Okay. By the way, if you go to sdkrashen.com, you might come across a couple of those articles there. So what can we do about this? How can we take advantage of it? I have suggestions. The best way to make sure kids are interested in reading and they get a reading habit, access to books. We have failed this really badly. And that means the school library. Take a good look at the name I put on the screen. Keith Curry Lance. Keith Curry Lance, a researcher in the Midwest, in my opinion, has been done outstanding research. If you go to schools with good school libraries, that means with lots of books and a good variety, okay, and the books are right, etc. The books are there and available, and there is a professional librarian working for the school, a real school librarian who can order the right books and help match the books to kids. Students in those libraries, in those schools, have higher reading scores. How do you like that? It's the importance of the school library. Okay. Let me make a comment I shouldn't make, but I'll do it anyway. What do I care? There's a big effort now on banning books. You know about this. They find books that are obscene and things that kids shouldn't be reading about, etc. And a lot of school library books have been eliminated. There's committees, they say this has to go, etc. My suspicion is a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it is an attack on school libraries. What some people have called socialist, okay? Because the books are free. Kids don't have to buy them. Mark Twain wrote a book called Huckleberry Finn, and it was one of the first books to be banned, okay? And when that happened, Mark Twain said, "Great, I'm going to sell 25,000 extra copies this week," all right? Because people are going to want to read it now and see what's in it. Book companies don't make any money on library books one at a time, but they make a lot of money from bookstores. The ban and the complaints don't go to bookstores, they go to libraries. So my suspicion is some of this is an attack on libraries. I'll continue in the same philosophy with my next recommendations. There are other ways I know of getting kids interested in reading. I'll mention them to you and why they are outstanding and very different. The study by Adrians in the journal School Library Journal, as you see, it's a one-page study. She had a suggestion for her high school students. Allow students, in fact, encourage students, when they get a book that they like, pick up the book and draw a star in the inside cover. So a child will be browsing books Go pick up a book with 10 stars. Child will be more likely to want to know why that book was so powerful, why kids wanted to read it. Okay. This idea, I thought people would be very enthusiastic about it. And the next idea I'm going to give you. But I don't think it's being done anywhere. It hasn't caught on. The reason it hasn't caught on anywhere is it doesn't cost in anything. It's absolutely free. The ideas that get used in schools are ideas where rich people can get richer, where book companies can make money on it, etc. These ideas, absolutely free. The only benefit is that kids get to find books they like more easily. There's a similar one coming up, Dorell and Carol, Spider-Man in the Library. They put comic books in the library, but did not allow them to circulate. You had to go to the library to read the comic books and the graphic novels. Once they put comic books in the library, library traffic nearly doubled, and the amount of non-comic book material went up about 60%. Again, something that costs you very, very little. A collection of 30, 40 comic books, what's the difference? And it increased reading, etc. Nobody makes any money on it. So these are the ideas that work, and I hope you'll try out something similar. I may have come to a point here. Let's go to the next slide, and I'll find out what I was supposed to say. Oh, writing. Yes, good. Good. Favorite topic coming up. Short
Yeah.
segment on writing.
Would this be a good time to have a little break?
If people promise to come back, because this is so cool, this next one.
Yeah. just a 5-minute stretch
Wait to
break.
tell you. 5-minute break. Okay, good.
And be sure to put your questions into the chat. Anything that has come up as you've been listening. We'll just have a chance to get up and here's some suggestions if you don't want to leave your chair. A very quick break.
Dr. Krashen, I just want to say I'm really enjoying this. This is excellent.
Thank you. It's good therapy for me too. I like talking about it. Thank you.
Well, it's really helping me think my teaching strategies and, you know, but the reading and how important that is. Self-selected reading, comprehensible versus homework, which you're right with getting the parents frustrated because some of them, they don't speak English themselves. So.
Is that you talking, Robin?
Yes, it is.
You know, when I was signed up for this, I didn't plan on staying the whole time, but I can't believe an hour has gone by and I haven't blinked. So thank you so much.
I'm taking all these notes because it's so conflicting, my teacher's guide with what you're saying. It's outdated material. It's very outdated. So now I know. So instead of homework, you give them age of self-selected readers to read for homework.
Yep, and let them browse in the library. They have a good collection.
Well, we don't have a library, but I have to get it through the home.
No.
Yeah, we don't have, it's a bilingual school. It's small, we're overcrowded, Spanish speaking, so we don't have a library.
What we have found, I'll give you an entire full talk in 1 minute. What we have found is that with bilingual kids, we call heritage language children, when they get excited about reading in the heritage language, they make fabulous progress and become totally bilingual. You got to have a good collection in the heritage language, in Spanish and Farsi, all the other languages, which we don't have. Okay. A few schools that do produce real bilinguals. That's the secret of bilingual ed. Read in both languages, a lot of it.
Oh, read in both. Read in both. Read in both. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. For
Yeah, because
pleasure.
some of them aren't as proficient in L1s. It depends how proficient they are in the L1s versus the L2. Because we have people from Guatemala and they don't speak Spanish, or they speak like a Mayan, like an indigenous language.
Okay, they need comic books in Spanish. Yes.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So heritage language, you said. Okay, books.
Dr.
In fact-
Krashen,
Yeah, free library.
I also want to thank you very much for this great presentation. You have contributed so much to the field. And in 2014, when I was writing my dissertation on second language acquisition, I got a lot of support from your writing and your books, especially when it was talking about input hypothesis. So that's such a great opportunity that I see you live, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank you.
And actually, I'd
My
like
pleasure.
to introduce. I'd like to introduce Farid. He is our one of our newest board members. He's now a trustee of the museum, and we have some other folks on the call with us today who are our associates. Rick Jackson, you want to wave hi there. Kathy Olsen-Studler, who's one of our liaisons. Craig Nedved, our outgoing president. Freddie Bowles, who's a liaison from Arkansas. And I'm sure there's more. Laura, you can help me if you spotted people I haven't.
Let me see.
Page 2. We'll go to page 2 here.
Yeah.
Oh, Mark Okrand, who is our constructed languages expert, Klingon and Vulcan, and he's one of our associates. Go ahead, Laura.
Well, I mentioned before, we have Amanda Mendoza with us today, who's our new state liaison from Kansas. One of the things I didn't mention when I was talking about the museum is that we have a liaison program around the country, and we have liaisons from 38 of the 50 states now, plus District of Columbia and 5 foreign countries. So Freddie Bowles, who's on the call here, is our liaison from Arkansas. Kathy Olsen-Studler is our liaison from Minnesota. So it's, we're truly becoming a national museum because of all these connections that we have.
And we do have some questions and comments in the chat. I've just added the link to the chat for our stories. Somebody mentioned reading in the languages that you're studying, or in a heritage language. We have children's stories in 17 different languages on the page that I've linked there in the chat. So the first question we have is Freddie asking about comparing reading an actual text versus virtual. So paper versus digital, I guess. Is that what your question was?
Okay, I'll tell you what the research says. My job is to tell you what the research says. Here it is. It makes common sense. If it's a narrative text story, academic, you're better off with a paper version. You remember more, take more notes, go through it more slowly, which is why I was very disturbed, as were others, when the Vermont University Library System decided to get rid of all the books in their university library and make everything digital. I think that's pretty drastic, and I don't think it's going to make kids any smarter, make them better readers. I think books have a place. It was Umberto Eco who said that books are a good example of a perfect invention that cannot be improved on, like the spoon. The spoon is a wonderful invention. The same thing with the book. We all understand that. And when some things will work fine in digital, but what happens is when I get a digital manuscript, if I want to really work on it, I've got to print it out. I've got to print it out so I can make notes in the margin, underline, go back and find the places, etc. So books are the way, I think, still. We still don't have anything better than the book and the library. They're getting rid of the libraries completely. They're going to use them for other things. Think of the money saving. They're going to fire some faculty. They already said that as if they were proud of it. But when they do that, where do kids go to sit quietly and work? If you are not a wealthy or middle-class child, where can you go and actually do your work, look up things, etc.? Middle-class kids have it at home too. These kids don't. We take this for granted because people like me really had to think about it. I realized how fortunate I was growing up middle class because we had space, books, libraries I couldn't miss. We need to make sure that's there for everybody.
Um, Rick Jackson asked if you would adjust your recommendations for adults learning another language.
Absolutely not. Same thing. That's my problem. I'm constantly looking for easy books and other languages. So until I get warmed up, and they've got to be interesting. So I would, especially for adults, because the temptation is to make it hard right away. No. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. And Freddie asked, commented about a bookmobile coming to small towns. Yeah, I remember bookmobiles.
Yeah, wonderful. I like bookmobiles and I like little free libraries.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
and yeah, so she recommended maybe Robin could start a free library box in her area. And we have a collection of children's books in many different languages. And if any of you are interested in maybe helping us to rehome that collection, it's been in storage now for I think about 7 years, but we're looking for a place to rehome that. If any of you have a library that is looking for a multilingual children's books, get in touch with us. I'll put our email in the chat here if you want to email us independently.
Could I put in a quick commercial message for something else?
Yep.
Comic books, comic books, comic books, comic books.
We have a collection of comic books in many languages too.
Good.
Anybody's
Here's
interested
why,
in
as
those.
you know already. Just in case I haven't impressed you, let me tell you that I'm the world's #1 expert on comic book research and the impact of comics on reading, possibly because I'm the only one doing research in this area. But boy, is it strong. Comic books are fabulous. Not only that, comic books literature, since Marvel Comics came on the scene with superheroes with real problems, comics have really taken off and gotten much, much better. I'm a big fan, a big admirer of Stan Lee and the Fantastic Four and the whole gang. Oh, I didn't tell you my story. When I was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, I was in the low reading group. My father brought home comics and said, I'll buy all you want. Just have a good time. I went up to the next level. Graphic novels, absolutely yes. Comic books, absolutely yes.
Okay, so that was Laura's had the question about graphic novels. Got a lot of questions coming up here. Elizabeth asks, is language which is acquired more easily retained or retained longer than a language which is learned? And does that change with age?
Coincidentally, I've just started thinking about this. I haven't really given it much thought until I had a couple of instances in my life. I was in a drugstore in my town, and the person behind the counter had a German accent. So of course I started speaking German to her. And that's my best second language. Okay, but it's from like 50 years ago when I was a music student in Vienna. Kind of long story. Anyway, and since then I haven't really done much German. But we started speaking German and it felt very easy. And she said, "How long have you been here in the United States?" I said, "Well, I was born here. I'm American." She was astonished. My German was actually quite good. She thought I was native-like. It's because it was acquired. That's my first hypothesis, not consciously learned. I can fool people in languages where I've had lots of comprehensible input and a good feeling for it. So my hypothesis, not saying it's true, but maybe we have longer memories, a better memory for languages we have acquired than languages we have simply consciously learned.
And Robin asked, what percentage of the time should students read in their first language when assigning the graded readers?
I don't know, but I do know, and we're just beginning to understand how beneficial it is. The person who really put bilingual education on the path was Jim Cummins, of course, and he talked about what we call a common underlying proficiency. And I think he was absolutely right. I think Any knowledge that you get through any language will help you understand any other language. So if you do lots of reading in English, it's going to help any second language because you know more, you understand more. If you do it in your second language, you'll know more, it'll help you all the way down. So I don't know exact percentages, but our first step is to make sure that the reading is there, and there's a lot of it. As much as we're going to have a hard time getting more than just little bits. Even Spanish, in Spanish-speaking areas, in schools where most of the kids are from Spanish-speaking families, the amount of books in Spanish in the school library is usually very small and not well taken advantage of. So this is an area we really have to look at. And I think we'll see the results, and we can find out just how important it is when we get more data. Let's talk about writing. If you want to get better in writing, the solution is more writing, more correction. No, that's never worked. More writing does not mean better writing, because writing is output, not input. More input, more reading will result in better writing. Consistent result. Those kids who read more, write better. Absolutely. They acquire the code more, etc. Writing has advantages. Most important, writing, as you see in the handout, writing helps us solve problems. It can make us smarter. Okay. That's what writing does for it. And this little bit that I'm sharing with you has helped me enormously. You write something down. As you write it down, you realize this wasn't really exactly the right answer. Let me go over it again. Let me revise this and try one more time. Next slide, and while it's coming up, I'll tell you something mystical and important. Here we go. Your subconscious mind wants to help you. Your subconscious mind wants to help you solve problems and wants to make you smarter. When you have a writer's block, which I get all the time, rejoice, be happy, because it means you're about to solve a problem, you're about to learn something new. This was said very eloquently by the mathematician Poincaré. Poincaré did the mathematics of relativity. People think he should have won a Nobel Prize. People think Einstein should have won a Nobel Prize. He got it for other things, not for relativity. Another story. Anyway, Poincaré said when he runs into a block in doing math, he gets up from the table and does something he calls mindless. Just put some wood on the fire. Then come back to the work. And that minute or two, the short break, will give you a little hint of the answer. The roadblock, the log jam will start to ease up a little bit. And with each break you take, you get a little better feeling. Short breaks. As soon as you think you may have some kind of answer, go back to your desk, start writing. Let me tell you about my secret life in hotel rooms, what I used to do in hotels. I don't travel much anymore, so not too much in hotel rooms, but I used to do this, and this worked out very well. Get into the hotel room. First thing I did was put my suitcase on the bed. Open it up, that's it. Then sit down at the desk, open up my computer and start to work right away. Then I've got a paper I'm working on, etc. I got a letter of recommendation to write, etc. Then as soon as I have a writer's block, I stop, go back to the suitcase, take out 2 shirts, hang them up, then go back to the writing. And as I'm taking the break, I get an insight, I write it down right away. So someone said that there's a story of the man who, such a great idea, he sank to his knees to thank God and found on getting up, he'd forgotten the idea completely and never recalled it. That happens to me. I've got to write it down right away or it's gone. Let's go to the next bit, the next display. Okay, so the real composing process, how to become very, very smart. And let me tell you, this works. Start writing. As you write, I promise you, you will have a block. Something won't fit. Okay. Take a very short break. During the break, you can incubate. That's your subconscious working, solving the problem, working on it for you right away. When you have a problem, the subconscious regards that as orders and goes right to work. Write down the new insight. Do it again till you get the next block. Again, again, and again. What I found when I moved into, after, time in a hotel room, the room would be a mess. So I'd start doing this. And within a little while, the room would be clean, everything would be in order, and I make progress on 3 pages of an essay I was supposed to write. So this absolutely works. Writing is there to make you smarter. The hard thing, let's go to the next slide. The hard thing is doing the very first draft. Okay? That's what I had to learn. First part of this that I had to learn. The subconscious won't help you unless it has something to work on. So you got to write down that first draft and get stuck. It was Ernest Hemingway who solved that for me. Brilliant statement. The first draft of anything is shit. That's Ernest Hemingway. Once you understand that, you're not afraid to write that first draft. Now, some breaks help, some breaks don't. I figured out for myself what helps and what doesn't. Might be the same for you. You can't take a break by working on another problem, working on another writer's block. That's not a good break. It has to be something really dull. I think this is nature's way of letting us do the ordinary, boring work of life, like washing dishes. Is not very interesting. Use it for your incubation breaks. Don't do it when you drive. When you drive, don't take a pencil and pen and start marking. You're going to forget it. What happened to me, this one hypothesis I worked on years ago. I was driving on the Pasadena freeway, and I was worried about this one problem in application. How does the natural order fit into the order of acquisition and all this? And I had this idea while I was driving. I stopped the car as soon as I could find a safe place to park. Parked the car and wrote down the answer, got back in. And that's been one of the major results of my work. I call it the Pasadena Freeway Hypothesis. Should you go for a walk? Sure, as long as you take paper and pencil with you. Because you never know when the idea generator, the new idea is going to hit. Make sure you're in a position so you can write it down right away. I have pencil and paper with me no matter where I go, and you know where I'm talking about there as well. You just never know when it's going to hit. Okay, next slide. Oh, website. Well, I can give another commercial message for my website. Okay, there's all these wonderful websites. You can get great stuff. I had no idea that the Language Museum even existed. Now I'm a big fan. This is wonderful. My website, sdkrashen.com. And I have been pushing this pretty hard. The problem is let me rephrase this. These ideas that I've shared with you today, all the way from comprehensible input to writer's blocks, some of them are pretty old. I've been working on some of them for 30 years. I've written papers about it. I think my first papers on comprehensible input are probably 40 years or 50 years. And it's not universally used. It's not universally accepted. I have to admit that I have not been a great success in getting these things applied and in classrooms. And I think I know why, and I think I have part of the solution. One problem is, as I've mentioned, if you want to find out about it, how are you going to find out about comprehensible input, composing process, all this stuff? Who will tell you? If you look at journals and you look at books, the articles are largely incomprehensible. I've tried to read these things written by my colleagues, and I can't make sense out of most of them, or I fall asleep after the first page because they're so dull. And they're much too long. They're boring, they're much too long, they're incomprehensible, and they're expensive. Nobody I know can afford these things. I am now a professor emeritus at the university, and I just found out after all this time that I have what's called library privileges. I can ask the library to make a copy of an article and they'll do it. Very few people are in that position. You have to be a faculty member at a Class 1 university to get library privileges like that. Most people don't have it. I have gotten so many ideas and so much work from being able to browse libraries and going into old journals. Not anymore, they're all on digital and they're too expensive anyway. So the way around it is people like me making their articles available to the public. Benito Mason has done it, Jeff McQuillan has done it, other people have done it, and it'd be great that it would spread. Anything I think that is beneficial to the common good needs to be made available for free. You'll make plenty of money without it, don't worry. Okay, next question.
So we have a question from Andrew about supporting youth learning a second language when their primary language is a spoken language, not written. He works with youth who
Well,
speak.
you got to have comprehensible texts, which means you have a little bit of the alphabet.
Mhm.
You need to learn a little bit of the alphabet, and that's not real hard. You don't have to know every single phonics rule. That's a misnomer that you have to do intensive phonics and get them all. You know, initial consonants for most languages is usually good enough. Let me give you a quick idea of how we learn to read, which is not the same as the so-called science of reading, which I think is totally wrong, in my opinion. Science of reading is basically a money-making project, in my view. Okay, I'm not the only one who thinks so. The way we learn to read is the way we understand anything. How do we understand the world around us? We make predictions, and we look to see if the predictions are correct. And we don't need a lot of detail to do that. Perception works this way. I'll give you an example. You're a teacher in an elementary school, and your sister has agreed to pick you up at 4:15. And she's going to come in her car, a brown car, you know her car very well. And she comes with your nephew, her little boy, and he sits in the back and he wears a blue hat, a Chicago Cubs baseball hat, okay? And your sister has straight, long brown hair. And she's always on time, all right? So at 4:03, you go out to the front door of the school, and there's your sister driving up. You notice there's a child in the back seat who seems to be watching something and has a blue kind of baseball hat on it. You start walking to the car. You don't have to look at the hat to make sure it says Chicago Cubs. You don't need every detail. You just need enough to confirm your predictions at a reasonable level. It's making predictions and getting them confirmed. This is a highly respectable theory of perception known as analysis by synthesis. Unfortunately, one of my heroes, Ken Goodman, called it the psycholinguistic guessing game. Sorry, Ken, that was a big mistake, because people said, oh, they're just guessing. No, they're making predictions.
Mhm.
And they're seeing if the predictions are right, and they don't need every bit of evidence to do it. You don't need to know every phoneme, every vowel, every word, etc. Most of our knowledge of phonics is picked up by reading, and you don't need to know every word. Let me give you some examples. I'll spell a word for you. CLIMB. How is the B pronounced? It's silent. You knew that, okay? If you're an experienced reader, you knew that. Comb, same thing. Do you pronounce the B? No. What's the rule? What's the rule for making B silent? I didn't know it. I had to look it up. Here's the rule. This will do you no good at all. Okay. If it comes after M and it's the end of the words, B is silent. Okay, good. I guess they'd want kids to learn that. Well, there are exceptions. What about CLIMBING, climbing? B is silent there. What's the rule? Well, it turns out what the suffix is like. What is it, grammatical suffix or non-grammatical suffix? It's a little bit complicated. I never knew that rule. You and I always get it right when we read. What about the word combination? It comes after M. Why isn't it silent? Well, it turns out it's the nature of the suffix. I had to look it up in one of Ken Goodman's books. Okay. You don't need to know all those rules. You just need to know enough to confirm your predictions. You don't need to know them all. I'm not opposed to teaching phonics. I'm not opposed to teaching initial consonants. I think a little bit of that is a good idea, but you don't have to go crazy. Some of the early evidence against having to learn all the phonics was gathered by Elaine Guerin, Fresno State University, for a very nice paper about that. She looked at the results of the National Reading Panel. It was 20 years ago. And when the results came out, people said, oh, phonics work. Kids with phonics do a lot better. Well, it turns out that wasn't quite right. Kids who had intensive phonics did very well on tests of reading words in isolation presented as a list, as long as the words were regular. It did not make their reading any better. It did not improve reading comprehension. So my conclusion from all this, a little phonics, fine, nothing against it. You don't have to go crazy. I would teach the alphabet, initial consonants. The rest, they're going to pick up. Everybody does, including you and me. That's how we got it. End of controversy. Again, it's big business, you guys. Just think phonics, 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 all the workbooks, all the, the lessons they have to do. My goodness. So it's a real moneymaker. Not necessary. A little bit, fine. A lot, not necessary.
Robin has a question.
Hi,
Go
Dr.
ahead, Robin.
Krashen. It's a two-part question. Okay, I'm understanding with writing, to increase writing, it's reading, comprehensible input, but also to increase writing, can you use comprehensible input listening? If you show them a video about a grammar point and a song, is that comprehensible input to them also when you're teaching writing?
Yes and no. I'll give you a clear answer. Okay, yes and no.
I have another question too after this. Go ahead.
Okay, good. If they get lots of language through listening, through music, etc., their general language competence will improve. It's comprehensible input. So of course it's going to help, no question. I don't think there's anything specific that they're going to get from a specific song that's going to make their lives better. I like the idea of lots of music around, hits, good tunes, etc. If they get to see the words, that's even better because
Right,
they like
educational.
because they like it a
Right.
little bit. If they like the words and they want to read them off and learn them, fine.
Okay, because they
Okay.
get excited about it and they get into it when I show it to emphasize a point about grammar or use a song.
You don't even have to emphasize the point, Bubula. Just let them look at the words. They're going to love it.
Okay, great.
They'll
Okay.
acquire all the.
Okay. Also, I use,
If-
go ahead. One last part. I use these workbooks, which are language exercises, and they cover the topics for like vocabulary, sentences, and how to write things. And it has a caption up top describing what they're supposed to do. Like it gives them the lesson up top, and then they have to do the exercise. Is that good to utilize?
I haven't seen it, but I've seen many of them, and none of them are any good. I would rather
Oh.
they're reading a good book, reading a good story. That's
Okay,
going to be
got
much.
it. Got it.
People have learned to read really great without the workbooks. I don't remember any of them when I was a kid.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Okay.
thanks, Robin. Amanda has a question. Would you like to ask your question, Amanda?
Sure. Hi, Dr. Krashen.
Hi, man.
So I don't know how familiar you are with ACTFL. I know you've probably done some webinars with ACTFL and such, the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Language. So they really push authentic resources and using authentic resources to teach the language. And for me, I feel like it conflicts with what you say and what language acquisition shows. All the research that you should be using readings that are below or easy for your students. It's at their level or below their level. It should be whole language, fiction, stories, things like that. And then when you went into the authentic, more authentic text for students, like I have this whole library full of kids magazines from, I teach French, and I have like daily or weekly news things for kids. I have these magazines that are like about animals and or history that's written for children in France. And so my third and fourth year students just flock to those magazines because they want to learn something new, and they're in French and they're little blurbs. They've
That's
got
right.
lots of pictures.
They don't want to learn a regular verb. They want a good story.
No, we don't do that.
Have you ever read Le Petit Nicolas?
I
short
actually really haven't. I've seen a few of the comics, but I know a
You're
lot of
gonna
teachers
love 'em.
teach that. But for me, that's a little,
My
it might be a
kids
little too
never
hard
taught-
for them.
Well, then they won't read it. They'll try something. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Let them try it. A
Yeah.
lot of good
So
stuff.
my
for kids.
my
About
question was,
Tintin.
yeah, but
Do
my
you have
question is,
Tintin comics?
Tintin, no, because
Very good.
some of the topics, I don't know. Weird, but they like this nonfiction stuff, and I know that fiction might be more the way to go. So they start out with all these readers, all the language readers. My big question was, do you know of any research to back up Actful's claim that we should be using only authentic resources to increase proficiency in our students?
Well, I don't think authentic really counts. I think interesting and comprehensible counts. That's the idea. And then you
Okay.
get all the language. If it's interesting, if it's comprehensible, all the language is there. Whoa.
Yeah.
That is really an incredible hypothesis. If it's interesting and comprehensible, it's got what they need.
Okay. Thank you.
The best children's books are the ones with the good stories. Okay. Take a look at Le Petit Nicolas.
And it says, when teaching my adult foreign language students, they're resistant to reading low-level children's books. What would be a solution to start applying this approach at the very lower level of proficiency for input to be comprehensible but age appropriate? Oh, Hannah can't get their camera to work.
Yeah,
That's why.
the major factor is interest and comprehensibility. The language will automatically be correct.
But
That's helpful. It's not the.
But I
whole
guess
solution.
it has to do with maybe the learner's perception about something maybe being kind of insulting to them because it's for children and they're an adult. Okay.
Just need an interesting story. That's all. It's hard to do. It is.
Mhm. Yeah.
I like Adriano Ramirez's stuff because in Spanish, a lot of the stories are very simple, but pretty darn good, pretty interesting. That's what we're looking for.
Mhm. All right. So any other questions we have?
Jill, I have one, a quick one for Dr. Krashen. If I understood correctly, when you talked about the 3 stages of a reading program, the third stage would involve the learners choosing materials that Actful would refer to as authentic materials, right? They're materials written by natives of the language, in the language for other natives to read.
Yeah, that's going to be hard. And I don't know how much of it you can use in a language program. I want people to get to the point where they can start reading this authentic stuff. I don't know how much of it they can do, but there are easier stuff and there's more difficult stuff. When I was doing German, I made really good friends with a lot of the other students. In those days, English was not the universal language. This was in the 60s. So we all spoke bad German to each other. And we had German speaking friends. We would gradually filter in native speakers and gradually recommend to each other books in German that were comprehensible, even though they were written for native speakers. That was so helpful. Try this, dude. You'll like it. Okay. And you don't have to know every word. Can be done.
So you found the German Hemingway.
Yeah, or something. Yeah, you're right. Good, good.
Short sentences. All right.
It was
Thank
actually
you,
Heinrich
Rick.
Bode.
Okay, other questions? Raise a hand or unmute.
I have a question, if I may.
Oh yeah, free.
Okay. Dr. Krashen, once again, thank you very much for this presentation. So would you please discuss briefly the role of first language and learning or teaching second language? Is there any role
The
for
role of the first language?
yeah.
In teaching a second language,
Teaching or learning second language?
teaching or learning a second language?
I would use the first language to make the second language more comprehensible. We do this in bilingual education all the time. We'll have a subject that we know is going to be complex. The students can read a passage on it in the first language. The teacher can explain it in the first language. The rest of it is more comprehensible. Common sense, I think. I would not
So
do
it should
word
not
by
be
word
in the
translation.
form of translation, right?
No. Boring doesn't help.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are people on the ends of that spectrum, right? That who would say, "Oh no, you can't use the first language at all in teaching a second language."
No. Big help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
these
stuff I
days
read in,
there's
okay, I was going to make one short comment. The stuff I read in second language, I read a lot of stuff about second language acquisition. I read a lot of professional journals written in other languages. I can understand them because I know so much about the field. I don't have to have read it all in another language. It's all there. It's very comprehensible.
these days there is a lot of push to immerse students into the target language. Sometimes they say that it has to be more than 90% in the target language. So that's why I posed that question.
Okay. Oh, can I do another commercial message?
Sure.
I am on Facebook. I used to be on Twitter and I got kicked off and I still don't know why. I made some mistakes. Anyway, I'm on Facebook. I find it very good. I'm posting a lot of new information on Facebook. So check out what I post every so often. You'll keep up with the latest stuff.
Well, first of all, again, Steve, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your thoughts and ideas.
Right.
And it really makes sense to me as somebody who's been a language learner that whether it's from reading a story or from conversing directly with native speakers in the language, if the exchange is related to some kind of interesting episode, you always remember it. It sticks in your mind, the phrases and the expressions that people use and so on. And one of the issues that I was involved when I worked for the government was that we were trying to train military personnel in national security languages, or something like that. And the idea was wanted to get them up to level 3 on the ILR scale, which would be like, distinguished or close to it. And, many of these students were not level 3 in their native language, which is English.
Right. How
And,
about
and the
that?
idea of trying to get people who are not really functioning at that level in their native language up to a high level in a second or third language is really challenging. I think it presents extreme difficulties for the educators involved in trying to do that. And
Asking a lot. I know. Hard to do. I don't know if this ever worked.
Yeah, I mean, I encountered many of our instructors who were high level native speakers of whatever their native language was, and usually 3 or 4 other languages too. Talking to one of our faculty members, and his English was amazing. I think he was originally a speaker of Dari. He grew up with that, and then when the Russians were in Afghanistan, he learned Russian and he went and studied in Moscow and all of that. And his English was amazing. And I asked him, how did you learn English? And he said, I read the Washington Post every day.
How about that?
Yeah, it's just what you were talking about. I mean, but he was at such a high level in several other languages already that, I think that from reading the Washington Post or other kinds of media, but he specifically mentioned he would read the Washington Post every day, and that helped him to learn English. I was very impressed by that. He didn't take a course or anything, just learned it. So these are big issues, like Amanda was talking about, with emphasis on authentic materials for people who are at the early stages of language learning and how effective that would be. I thought it was really good what you pointed out about using the graded readers to get people just used to reading something that isn't a huge struggle to read. You know, they can get through it.
They're getting better.
Yeah. So anyway, again, thank you again for sharing your time with us, and it was a wonderful presentation. Really appreciated it.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and come back next time.